A little closer, I can reach it. Good morning, everybody. They tell a story that God says to Moses, "Lo savashel gedi b'chalei v'imo." Don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. And Moshe says to Hashem, "Does that mean you can't eat meat and dairy together?" Hashem says, "Yes." "Does that mean you can't cook them together?" Hashem says, "Yes." "Does that mean you can't derive any benefit from them?" So, okay, Moshe, have it your way. Don't cook anyway. The point being that our source, obviously, for not eating meat and milk together is biblical, the way the rabbis interpret it. And the question is, all right, we can't eat meat and dairy together, but how much time has to separate in between eating meat and dairy, or dairy and meat? Well, we'll see. We'll see. The Gemara in Chulin says very clearly that if you eat meat, you can't eat dairy. But if you eat dairy, you can eat meat, which means afterwards. Question is, how much time afterwards you have to wait after eating meat before you can eat dairy, or after dairy to eat meat?
Well,
yeah.
If we get to that, is there a reason why? In other words, what's the reason why that?
Okay, so people have been struggling with this for ages. There are those like the Rambam and a few others who originally looked at the prohibition of boiling a kid in its mother's milk as an act of pagan cruelty that we should not imitate. So that's, but again, it's you get into the murky reeds when you try to give reasons for what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to do or not to do something. So,
saying that's irrelevant, and no reason here, or
Chazal tell us that we ought, unless you are given a specific reason in the Torah, and you're not, for mitzvos, our job is to observe mitzvos, not to figure out what behind HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mind. Yeah.
Wouldn't it make sense, which unfortunately not the reason, once you've digested something, it's fully digested, then you can have the other.
People have been trying to give medical reasons, hygienic reasons, dental reasons, why you shouldn't eat meat and milk together or one after the other. We will take a look now. There are two major shittos. The point is the Torah doesn't tell us why. The Torah simply says don't do it. And Chazal are very quick to tell us that it's difficult, if not impossible, for us to try to understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us to do or not to do something. These are the mitzvahs. That's our job to do them. Philosophers and interpreters try to give reasons for them, but we have no way of knowing if those reasons are correct. It's theory. Some people would say it's chutzpah to attribute a reason why Hashem does something. So what we're going to try to do today is understand at least some of the different points of view in terms of the separation, in terms of how much time there has to be in between them. And the reasons, try to give reasons for it. Rashi tells us that there is once you've had meat, the taste of meat remains in your mouth. That's Rashi's pshat. The Rambam is more practical. The Rambam says the meat might stay in between your teeth, especially if you have gaps in your teeth. And we know that oral hygiene was not practiced until very, very recently in world history. So the Taz tells us that the normative halakhic position is that we take into consideration both points of view, that the taste is there and that the food not literally be stuck in your teeth. So we wait a longer period of time after meat than dairy, which is more easily digested. The Gemara quotes, yeah.
Nowadays, that we have oral hygiene, why should it be enough to just wash?
So what you've done is just pointed out why it's dangerous and hazardous to try to give reasons for mitzvahs. Exactly because of that. Because if in fact that is the reason, then once that reason no longer becomes valid, you don't have to do it anymore. But the Torah doesn't say, the Torah simply is emphasizing not to do this. Why it's emphasizing not to do this?
No way doesn't say that you shouldn't eat meat.
So we have a rabbinic understanding. Torah Sheba'al Peh explains Torah Sheba'Ksav. The Torah Sheba'al Peh tells us that it's mentioned there 3 times to tell us not to eat them together, not to cook them together, not to derive benefit from them. Those are the 3 biggies. Now, subject to machlokes is how long you have to wait in between these 2. You can't eat them together, that's clear. You can eat one after the other, but the question is how soon? That's what we're going to try to discuss today. There's a fascinating Gemara. Mar Ukva, one of the Amoraim, calls himself Chometz ben Yayin. I am vinegar, the son of wine. First great expression. Why? Because his father would wait a full 24 hours after meat before he would eat dairy. That's Mar Ukva's father. He waits till the next meal and then he's fine. That's why he calls himself, Chometz ben Yayin, vinegar. The wine is obviously a high on my drink, whatever. Okay, let's take a look at the Rishonim. In terms of, now the Gemara also mentions that you can eat dairy after meat, l'seuda achrita, at the next meal. When is that next meal? How often do you eat? Are you on the American plan or the European plan? You have 2 meals a day, you have 3 meals a day. Does a snack constitute a meal? How much do you have to eat considered a seuda? How do you interpret the expression the next meal, where you can eat dairy after meat, or meat after dairy? The Rambam says when you have to wait in order to eat dairy after meat, he says the normal time when you have the next meal. You have to wait an amount of time, but it's not defined. It's not defined. And the languages that he uses is kamo she sha'os. We'll come back to that later. Kamo, approximately 6 hours in between meals. That's the Rambam Shita. Tosfos, and Rambam is a Sephardi, we know that. Tosfos, which are Chachmei Ashkenaz, starting with the grandsons of Rashi, Tosfos says very clearly, if you bench after a fleshik meal, you can have dairy right away. The difference is the next meal is defined by Birkas HaMazon. If you bench, you can have dairy. I'm not poskening, please. I am not poskening la halacha on any, I keep on repeating, when we talk about halacha, I am not poskening. You want to know what to do, ask your rabbi. I'm just giving you what the different views are. Okay? So he said, Tosfos says, bench, it's the next meal when you eat again. And therefore you can have dairy right away. You can consume, even if it's right after the fleshik meal. So you have a machlokas. Now the Rosh, by the way, the Rosh is a fascinating person. The Rosh was a Talmud of the Maharam. He lives in Germany. He had to run away from Germany to go to Spain. He became a great Rosh Yeshiva in Spain. So he's an Ashkenazi and a Sephardi at the same time. And the Rosh follows the Rambam's approach, not Tosfos, which is kamos sheishos, as opposed to the benching and eating right away, which is fascinating. Separate discussion. Okay. The language kamo, like 6 hours. Now again, I am not passing a halacha, I'm just giving you shitos. Reb Chaim Brisker, great Reb Chaim, student of a student of the Vilna Gaon, whose grandson was of Soloveitchik, whose son-in-law was Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein reports that he heard from the Rav in the name of Reb Chaim that approximately, or kamo she'os, means 5 hours and a minute. 5 hours plus is like approximately 6 hours. According, again, I'm not costing, but this is said in the name of, but the majority of poskim hold 6 complete hours. I'm just putting that out there. Majority of Ashkenazic poskim hold 6 hours. We'll get to the Yekis and the Dutch later. Okay, the Tur, which is our major posek for Ashkenazic Jewry, also says full 6 hours. Most poskim hold that way. Shulchan Aruch quotes out the halacha. He mentions the dissenting view of Tosfos, but he says the common practice of European Jews, this is now in the 16th century, which is interesting, to wait only an hour between meat and dairy. But it's proper to follow the Rambam's view that you wait 6 hours. And the Shacha, the Taz, and all the Ashkenazi poskim hold 6 full hours. And this is the minhag of most Ashkenazic Jews. Now, the Farshim, the contemporary poskim, the Chachmas Adam and the Aruch HaShulchan, all emphasize 6 complete hours. In the aftermath of the Spanish Inquisition, a lot of Jews went to Holland and Amsterdam. And for some reason, they followed a modified view of Tosfos. And the Dutch Jews, to this day, wait 1 hour after Fleischiks before they eat milkers. But again, unless you were born in Holland, or your parents were born in Holland, that's not for you. Okay? The Zohar kind of indicates it someplace. But as the Rav has said many times, we don't paskin halachas from the Zohar. Also, the Taz quotes this 1 hour minhag, that it's a compromise between Tosfos, who says Birkas Hamazon is the only boundary, and the Rambam, who says approximately 6 hours. Again, nowhere that I could find is a source, a reliable source for waiting 3 hours. Doesn't exist. You might want to say it's a compromise between 6 hours or 1 hour, but it's not found anywhere. It's either 6 hours or 1 hour or 5 plus into the 6th hour, some people will say.
So why is into the 6th any better than waiting 3?
Because the Rambam holds kamo she'os. That's the amount of time that normally people take in between meals.
Oh, so it's
The amount of time between meals is approximately 6 hours. Now, it depends if you're on the American plan or the European plan.
or you're on the seafood diet.
Yeah. Well, that's, again, that would be Tosfos. Yeah.
Where's the custom of, after hard cheeses, you wait 6 hours?
I'm going to come to that in a moment. Yeah.
You would see 3 hours is more of a compromise than 1 hour is, because 3 hours, Tosfos said 0, or 6, so 3 is right in the middle.
Okay, so
6, 1 is like nowhere.
the only problem with that is you have to find somebody authoritative to support that position. Haven't found it.
I heard from a number of people
Yes.
why they came up with 3 hours. And medically, it's a definition of where is the food after 3 hours. And medically, they say After 3 hours, the food is no longer in your stomach. And once it's in the digestive tract, that is an entity in itself. It's no longer in your body. And that was the reason why Yankees came up with 3 hours.
Okay, so I have a couple of responses. Number one, who is the they? That's question number one. Question number two, is there still meat stuck in your teeth after 3 hours? We know that to be true.
Cheese in your teeth too.
Okay, we'll get to that. All of these are valid questions, but the Kamoshe Sha'os, either 5 or 6 hours, seems to be, with the exception of the Dutch, the normative practice. We know Germans wait 3 hours, but I don't know where it comes from. And who is, no, the most famous rabbi in the world is Rabbi Samsei. Have you heard of him? Some say this, some say that. Who's Rabbi Samsei? Everybody, I'm willing to entertain that possibility. Just give me a source. I don't have one. However, halacha l'maaseh, a Chassam Sofer, a Soloveitchik, or a Chashulchan, all poskin that if a person is ill and has to have milk, he can have it after fleishiks for ulcers, for example. You have to drink milk all the time. You don't have to wait 6 hours. B'makam sakana, that we're not goes there to be so strict. The only other area where there is a discussion is something that we don't have too much of today, and that is hard cheese. There's universal agreement that hard cheese that's been aged for 6 months or more, requires 6 hours afterwards, as opposed to other dairy products. Because hard cheese is like something it sticks around for a long time. We don't, first of all, I don't know if hard cheese, the way it used to be done in Europe, exists anymore, number one. Number two, certainly in the kosher cheese market, there's no hard cheeses. We in Europe, you have it in France and a few other places where they make these specialty gourmet cheeses. Hard cheese pretty much doesn't exist in our world anymore. How aged is aged? 6 months or more qualifies as hard cheese. I don't know if any cheese that we eat today qualifies as hard cheese.
Like a Swiss cheese is not.
No.
Yeah. Wally, there are cheeses now that you get in kosher stores from Europe.
Yes.
Those kind of cheeses.
They're not aged.
They're not aged.
Not.
They are harder than.
Yes, but in Europe, they would take these cheeses in these big round wheels, and they put them someplace in a cupboard or in an outdoor shed and leave it there for 6 months or more. Then they come back, it's got a crust on it. You know, it's hard, cheap. We don't have, that's question number one. But if you do come across kosher hard cheese someplace in Europe, 6 hours. A separate, there's one other question that I want to raise. I don't have a good answer to. How is cheese made? Cheese is made with a chemical called rennet. Rennet is found originally in the stomach lining of animals, cows and sheep. What they used to do to make cheese, they would slaughter a cow, take out its stomach, pour milk into the stomach, let it sit for a while, and the rennet in the stomach would harden. I remember when I was in 9th grade, Dr. Frankel, my biology teacher, he took a beaker of milk, tall beaker of milk, and he poured about this much of rennet into the milk. And then he went on teaching his class. And then 20 minutes later, he took that beaker and he dumped it on somebody's desk. And everybody was going to sit back and look for a splash. And it came out in one big tube, glob. because it became hard, like cheese. It's a great experiment. It made an impact. I still remember it now from 1958, 7, whatever. In any event, rennet is what makes cheese hard. To the best of my knowledge, nobody uses the lining of animals in America to make cheese anymore. It's all done through chemicals or seaweed or other types of things. So the whole kosher cheese market may not need to exist. I'm not asking, don't quote me, but Rav Soloveitchik raised this issue many, many, many years ago, that in America today, they don't use actual cow or sheep stomachs to make cheese anymore. Because it was done, everybody did it on their own farm, in their backyard. So it was something that was a home base. I wouldn't even call it an industry, but people used to make their own cheeses. So in conclusion, and it's really not a good conclusion, because once we are accustomed to doing things a certain way, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to change. If you've been following 6 hours, and that's what your family minhag is, that most Eastern European Jews follow. If you are a German and you follow 3 hours, look into it and find out where it comes from and who's the first reliable, quote unquote, authority that says 3 hours is a good compromise. Dutch have a legitimate sheet to the basis on. Tosfos is even more radical. You just bench. But most people follow the Rambam, and the only question is, kamo sheishos. What does kamo mean? Is it 6 full hours, or 5 hours and a minute, or 5 hours and something? All based on the pasuk of lo savashel gadi b'chali v'mo, not to eat meat and dairy together. Dairy can be eaten after meat, but meat can be eaten after dairy, but dairy can't be eaten after meat. Again, for that 5 or 6 hours, yes.
So what's the prevalent minute? If I want to have an ice cream, I have an ice cream cone, and I want to have a pastrami sandwich. Is there any way to come, or what do I have to do?
Rinse your mouth out, it's fine.
Like I have this sandwich right away.
Yeah, because again, the ice cream doesn't stick in your teeth the same way meat does.
Okay. How if I want to have pasta with cheese?
All right, so
Soft cheese, not hard cheese. Should I wait something or no?
technically you don't have to. Just rinse your mouth out.
Why can't you rinse your mouth after you eat meat? Get rid of
Again, because whether it's the Rambam or other Cheetos, the taste of meat remains stronger than dairy. Apparently, that's the halachic position. But again, I have to emphasize one more time. We run into problems when we try to give reasons for halachos. The Torah says to do something, you can try to understand what the Torah is saying. But to say this is a definitive reason why we do X, Y, or Z, that's when you run into trouble. Because we don't understand why Hashem says do this or do that. We can try to explain it, we can rationalize it, but ultimately, a mitzvah is at Sivli Hashem. Again, lo savasha gadi b'chalei bimo seems to be very straightforward. Don't see the kid in its mother's milk. Don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. It's an act of wanton cruelty. From that pasuk, the rabbis derived the prohibition of eating meat and dairy together, or one after the other. So, but that's how our halakha system is based on. That Torah Sheba'al Peh. Yeah.
So if I could have a pastrami sandwich right after I have my ice cream or my mac and cheese, it can't be a digestive process. It's not a digestive issue.
I didn't say digestion. Again, the two should. It's not digestion. It's a physical problem. The taste remains in the taste of meat is stronger than the taste of dairy. Either the taste remains in your mouth or the meat remains in your teeth.
It sounded like it was a digestive issue.
That's interpretation.
It's not my interpretation.
I understand.
I heard that from many big rabbanim.
But it can't be a digestive issue.
I repeat what I said earlier, and on this I'll conclude. We run into trouble when we try to give reasons for the mitzvahs. We want to, because it's not, we didn't give the mitzvos, therefore we can't rationalize it or explain it. Yeah.
So I understand from the pasuk that you can't cook meat and dairy together. My question is, how did they get from that to the requirement to space out time? It's a huge difference.
Yes, so-
between cooking milks and flakes together
So-
as opposed to eating milks.
So this is the Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara in Chulin asked that same question. Gemara in Chulin says, why is the pasuk repeated 3 different times in 3 different places? And the answer is to teach us 3 different things. Not to cook them together, not to eat them together, not to derive benefit from them. So for example, one of the major shuls in our community was supported by a treif butcher. He was a frum guy. You know who I'm talking about. He gave the shul literally $1 million. Support the shul. And he was outwardly an observant person, but his business was treif meat. He was a treif butcher. Made a good living, obviously. But you can't, again, the Torah is what it is. We believe in Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. And the interpretation is cooking, eating, deriving benefit. And the question, the machlokes is, how long do you have to wait in between eating? And we try to explicate the different shitos. And a good assignment for those of German descent is to try to find a reliable authority who supports the 3 hours. Even, you don't want to look for it. Okay, any other questions? Yes, Milton.
Torah Shabbat Peh. Who are the Rabbanim who interpreted the Torah Shabbat Peh? Who are the ones? The people in the Gemara and the Mishnah, they're the ones who...
So you look in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos. There's Moshe, and there's Yeshua, and there's Zekanim, and the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, and then the Chachmei Mishnah, the Chachmei Gemara, and the leaders of each generation after that. It's a chain of tradition that goes down.
Okay, so you're talking about from the Mishnah.
Yes.
And into the Gemara.
Yes.
So the Mishnah, those Chachamim, they interpreted, and they came up with what they thought was good.
No, they didn't interpret on their own. They were based on a tradition that they had received
From who?
from their predecessors,
So who
their
was it?
teachers. Again, look in the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. It all goes back to Moshe and Har Sinai. Moshe received the interpretation from HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Har Sinai. Why was he out there for 40 days and 40 nights? It took a long time to learn all these halachos. And then he taught them to Yeshua with all the interpretations. And Yeshua taught it to the Zekanim of the Shvatim. And the Zekanim taught it to the Anshe Knesset Hagdola. And they taught it to the Chachmei HaMishnah, who taught it to the Chachmei HaGemara, and went to yeshivas in Bavel and Eretz Yisrael. And each generation of Rosh Yeshiva who kept on teaching Torah Shabbat Peh were repeating and passing over what they got from the previous generation.
But all these...
They weren't innovating
There
anything.
are different interpretations
But
among these Rabbanim.
they may differ in certain details. They didn't differ in the fact that you can't have fleishiks and milchiks together. Everybody agrees on that. The only discussion is how long do you have to wait in between? And that was subject to interpretation. And some people said this, some people said that.
So I have another question. It said, Losa Bashel Di B'Chalevi.
Yes,
You could interpret it, just you can't cook it together.
Yes.
You can eat it together.
yes.
Okay. And then why did they say a Gadim? Why not a cow? What was the emphasis on a goat?
Okay, because first of all, you can't cook a whole cow in its mother's milk. A little shepsel, a little sheep, a little calf, maybe. A little thing you can cook in a pot of its mother's milk, theoretically. Small. But the fact that it's repeated 3 times, this is how the Gemara interprets it. The whole Gemara in Chulin, I mean, in order to become a rabbi, you have to study certain sections of Yoreh Deah. And you have meat and dairy sections, you have mixtures. It's a lot of complicated stuff. More than you can possibly imagine. Believe me. The details that go into the machloks and make your head spin on all different points of view and interpretations of the simple things that you might think is simple. You know, at the end, this is the halacha. How you get to the halacha, what's behind the halacha, there are mountains and mountains of details and interpretations that all based on that original pasuk. Yeah.
I'm really not familiar with this area at all. So I have a question, sort of like spinning off of what Milton was talking about. So it's interpretations, this Rob, that Rob, and everything. Is there some kind of, in 2024, the year we're in, a global Shiur on Rabbanim giving a new interpretation?
Okay, so
I mean, because, I don't remember, was it your Shiur, somebody's Shiur? We were talking about 1,000,000 years ago, before all the, you know, when there was just OU and that was a little bit or something like that. And it was like, if it said, the cookie said 100% vegetable shortening, you know, growing up and stuff like that. So clearly, things have changed. Modern orthodoxy has changed, not just in kashrut, but in practice, everything like that. So what's to stop? No disrespect to the gedolim of the door, but what's to stop some rabbanim this year, in 5 years, to reevaluate?
nothing at all.
But say,
Okay, so in answer to your question, you know, it's the old question: who's driving the bus? You have today, one of our difficulties today is that we have no pope. There is no college of cardinals. There's no Sanhedrin. There's no one authority that is universally accepted by everybody. You have different authorities who are authoritative for their constituencies. So you would have the Rabbinical Council of America for most of modern Orthodoxy. You'd have the Agudas HaRabbanim for other segments of Orthodoxy. You would have the Moeses Gedolei HaTorah for a different group. You'd have the Haredi Vara Kashrus in Israel as opposed to the Chief Rabbinate. So you have many different sources of authority. So when each of these groups rules on a particular issue, it's primarily for their constituency. Until Bias HaMashiach, we're not going to have one unified authority that will speak for everybody. At one time, you had a Sanhedrin. And when you had a Sanhedrin, they made a psak, and that was it. There's no questions asked. Okay, but Avoseinu Harabim, we don't have a Sanhedrin. So until that time comes, we have to look to our own leaders for direction. And part of the difficulty that people have in the contemporary age is that it's very difficult because people shop around. They'll go to this rabbi, or they'll go to that rabbi, they'll find this psak, that psak, and that isn't the way halacha is supposed to be followed. If you have a teacher, you follow that teacher. You may not always like what the teacher says, but he's your teacher. Or if you are aligned with a certain group, you know, a king is only a king if he has subjects. A rav is only a rav if he has talmidim. And if talmidim start going shopping around for psak here and there, not a rav anymore, because the students don't feel that allegiance to him or to a group. This is part of being in Golos. What can I tell you? Hopefully
Rabbi,
that'll end soon.
question.
Last question. Yes.
Yeah. When did poultry become flesh? Do we know?
Yes. It was a machlokas in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who lived in the Galil, obviously, as his name indicates, held that chicken is not meat. And he would have chicken with milk until the rabbis pointed out the error of his ways. and then it became universally accepted that chicken is considered flesh. But that's good. But the question was raised by none other than Rabbi Yossi Haglili, so you're in good company. Okay, someone else had a question? Yossi, you had a question?
Just wanted to say that if Rabbi Yuli asks you how many Torahs there are,
Yeah.
he expects you to say two. Torah Shabbat
Torah Shabbat Sav, Torah. The truth is, it's all one. The truth is, the Torah Shabbat Sav and Torah Shabbat Peh are all one. And on that note, I wish you all a great day. Okay. Rabbi Saini Barech. Yishem Baruch B'David Olam. B'Shus Kol B'Suvin Kan. V'Rek Shachal Mishalo. V'Rek Shachal Mishalo. T'Vachayinu. Uno Se Lechem L'Chol B'So Kilam Chasto. Uz Kuvo HaGadol. Tamid L'Chol. Ki Hu Elon V'Neis L'Kol V'Kiv L'Kol Michim Mazon Chol V'Yasov Asher Bara. Uruchato Adonai Hazon Es HaKol. V'al HaKol. V'chato Adonai al ha'oretz v'al hamazon. Uvnei Yerushalayim ira kodesh meira v'yameinu v'chato Adonai v'rei v'rachamo v'Yerushalayim v'nei.
Does anyone have the right to change the minute to go from one time to another? Just to say, okay, my father held 6 hours, my grandfather, but I don't want to hold 6, it's too difficult for me, I want to do 3 now. Can you do that?
It's hard, unless there's a legitimate, family reason for it.
That may be a medical reason.
Medical reason is always different.
Yeah.
Medical, that's different. But if you marry a guy who's German.
Oh, yeah, you have to take on their.
Yeah.
He gave a shiur to Tzvi Fisher, and he was saying a situation where 2 people get married, one held 6, one held 3, and he said that both of them will keep their own minhagim. I said, well, what do the kids do? That's a crazy. You go one way, you go the other. You can't have 2 families.
When my daughter got married, her husband kept 3, so she
kept 3. But if she wanted to keep 6 and he would keep 3, and you have kids. If it's just the 2 of you, it's one thing.
Under other circumstances, when you want to change minhagim, depending on how legitimate the change is, sometimes you have to do Hataras Nedara. If you're changing something that you've done.
So I remember Rabbi Yudi, when he came here one day, which was on Friday night, he was coming to daven. He came here 3 times in the time period where he doesn't usually come.
Right.
So he did the Taras Nedarim over here because he said by his action he wasn't doing it, and now he did. So he came. So that seems to be a pretty.
I remember very clearly. Soloveitchik promised to finish a certain topic, and he didn't get to it. He said, "I'll finish it tomorrow." The next day came, he didn't finish it. He was still struggling with the Tosfos.